Hello, my name is Travis Dow, and this is our video demonstration for Driver Project 4. I'll zoom out there. So here's our group. So at the start of our application, we call the provided new clock function, which we're using to set our clock speed to 32 kilohertz. And then we call this IO initialization function, and that's just initializing the digital input-output pins we'll be using and the CN interrupt that we'll be using. Then we call this T2 initialization function, which is responsible for initializing the timer interrupt that we'll be using. And then we enter into this continuous while loop, which just puts the hardware into idle mode. So I can see here, I'll build this project. So when we are initially with nothing happening, we're just in idle mode. And then if I interact with one of the push buttons, we can see that the state is changed. So what's happening there is that when you interact with one of the push buttons, the CN interrupt is executed, and we enter into the CN interrupt function here. So that's just determining the state based on the inputs through the push buttons. So if no buttons are pressed, we turn the LED off and a display message saying nothing is pressed. If 3 buttons are pressed, we turn the LED on, display a message. If 2 buttons are pressed, we turn the LED on and display the appropriate message based on which buttons are pressed. If only 1 button is pressed, depending on which button it is, if it's the button attached to pin RA2, we say push button 1 is pressed and blink for 0.5 seconds. If it's the push button attached to pin RA4, we say PB2 is pressed and delay for 2 seconds. And if it's the push button attached to pin RB4, we say our push button 3 is pressed and delay for 3 seconds. And so in that delay function, what's happening is we set up the timer based on the argument integer that was passed, and we just put it back in idle mode again until the interrupt is triggered, at which point if the push button is still held down, it just toggles the LED between on and off. I'll demonstrate this by opening currently we have nothing being interacted with, and we can see that the display just says nothing is pressed. So if I push button 1, it says PB1 is pressed, and then it goes back to nothing is displayed. So if I hold down PB1 is pressed. We can see that the light is blinking 0.5 second intervals. Release it, and then if I hold down PB2, we can see that it's blinking at 2 second intervals, and there's PB2 is pressed. Release it. So I'll hold down PB3. So we're blinking at 3 second intervals, PB3 is pressed. And then we'll change hands here. Okay, so if I push 2 LEDs simultaneously, we should get a message. Sorry, I didn't have a push button pressed down. PB1, PB2 are pressed. The LED is always on. And oops, sorry. Oh no. And then if I hold all 3 down, we get a message that says all push buttons are pressed. And if I release 1, it goes, oops, there's 2. If I release the second one, there's 1. If I release the last one, there's nothing. All right, thank you very much.